You leave the tide of bodies in the great hall and climb a stair that tightens as it rises. Each turn squeezes away a little of the noise below until you reach a small landing and a heavier door. Beyond it, the solar, sunroom they call it. And on good days that is true. It sits high and south-facing to drink what warmth winter offers. But the sun reveals as much as it comforts. In the angled light, you can see the air itself, threads of smoke from the hall below that have found their way up the stair moats of dust, shaken from tapestries, a slow roll of warmth that has gathered human breath and holds it close. The first breath in here is cloth. The room is hung to soften the stone woolen tapestries, velvet cushions, woven covers on benches, and every fibre carries its own history. Beating them in spring raises a weather of old smoke and winter damp. In summer, the dye warms and gives off a faint animal sweetness. Moth and flea powders lend sharp little notes camphor, if the household can afford it. Powdered orris root or crushed rosemary, if not. The scent is civilized but not clean. On a bench by the window lies a fur-lined mantle. Furs have their own perfume, oily warm somewhere between kennel and musk merchant. Brush them and you release a breath of the creature that once wore them. The fur is kept in a carved chest when not in use. The chest smells of beeswax, dried lavender, sewn into little sweet bags and faintly mouse. The windows are not glass or not wholly. Horn panes or oiled cloth keep the draught out and the smell in. On still days, the solar is a sealed jar of family life. The floor often boarded rather than paved as rush mats or small carpets, and beneath them, the same story you've already learned to felt of crumbs, hair-dropped pins, and last winter's dog. The servants sweep, the boards still breathe. You notice a brazier. Charcoal burns cleaner than the kitchen's logs, but it is not scentless. It adds a dry metallic thread to the room, and when the pan is dumped, that ash offers its dusty ghost for hours. On frost nights, a warming pan slides across sheets before bed. It leaves a scorched linen whiff and the sharp tang of hot brass. Here, privacy is relative. The lord reads a letter. The lady stitches. A clerk scratches away at accounts. Children clatter in with a toy. A hound noses under a stool. Each brings a smell. Sealing wax, sweet as honey and resin ink, like damp iron wool, warmed by skin, child milk, and sleep and sudden sourness. Pomanders swing from a belt civet, if you're grand enough. Ambergris, if you are very grand indeed. Orange stuck with cloves if you are merely careful. These scents do not conquer the room. They are islands in a crowded sea. A door leads inward to the bedchamber. Beds are theatres. Their curtains make a world the size of a mattress, and the curtains keep what happens there. Draw them, and the air inside is your day distilled. Two bodies sleep there, sometimes more in childbed or sickness, and the cloth learns their language, breath turned stale by morning, the salt rim of sweat dried into the weave, the comfort and faint sourness of skin after a day in wool. Sun will sweeten it, winter will not. The mattress itself, bed and bed straw are not separate ideas for most smells of field, then of people, then of time. Good houses keep to feather beds, but feathers soured by damp have a notice all their own. a high, fatty note that clings to the throat. Straw compacts and goes sweetish, then mousy, then faintly moulded at the edges where a leak once visited and was never entirely confessed. Lice like heat, fleas like rushes, bedbugs like cracks in wood. Their presence has a smell if you know it, a little almond, a little dust, a little panic. Sheets are linen and precious. They are changed as labour allows, not as comfort wishes. Lye and urine cleanse them in the laundry. Between washings they keep the accounting of nights. If the household is pious, you'll catch a breath of holy water or rose water shaken on them before company. If thrifty, a handful of dried meadow sweet sprinkled and beaten away at dawn. There is a close stool in the corner, a chair with a lid lined with a removable pot. The pot is emptied by a groom, but never as quickly as the nose would prefer. Even clean the wood remembers. Vinegar helps herbs, help incense from the chapel, helps. But in still weather, the cupboard that hides the stool breathes faint reproach into the room. Men sometimes keep a Jordana-lidded urinal by the bed. It announces itself in the morning with a thin bite of ammonia and old pewter. Children's accidents are less polite. A narrow passage off the chamber goes to a private garderobe, its draught a hard winter truth. The wind through its slit can lift a bed curtain if the latch is not set, and with it comes the remembered shaft below, not loud, but present like a sermon you cannot quite ignore. Breath is biography in here. You can tell who slept ill. You can tell who had onions. You can tell when a tooth has started to rot, a sour infected sweetness that no clove or mint leaf can wholly disguise. A silver box on the coffer holds candied seed anise, fennel tow. Sweeten the mouth. It helps. It relocates the problem. Rose water rinses the face. The body goes largely unwashed through winter, wiped with a linen cloth, rubbed with a little vinegar, perfumed at the wrists. Under the fur, under the silk, we are still animals. The room keeps that truth politely, but firmly. The bedchamber is also where people are born and die. Childbed leaves a scent you do not forget. Sweat turned frantic, hot iron of blood. Sharp steam from water that never boils fast enough. Dried herbs bruised in desperate handfuls. Then if all goes well, milk. Milk becomes the room for months, curdled in cloths, left too long, sour on a baby's lip, sweet on a shawl. Sickness brings vinegar and urine and a low damp heat. The prayers bring beeswax at last, sweet and golden, the only truly clean smell a castle ever manages. It arrives with death more reliably than with dinner. Even without ceremony, death has a signature air that does not move in a space that once hummed a faint, thin sweetness. As skin cools wool that suddenly smells only of itself. The bed is stripped, the straw renewed, the curtains beaten. The chamber pretends, the nose does not. Listen and you can hear the castle in the solar. The hall below exhales wood smoke and ale through the floorboards. The kitchens send up onion and heat along the stair. The moat drifts in on a southerly night, a suggestion of green rot that slides under the door like a rumour. The solar and bedchamber are meant to be apart, but stone is a conductor, not a wall. And yet for all this, people love these rooms. Here the light falls kindly. Here letters are read and answered. Here children learn to stitch and fail at silence. Here at last a door latches. The smell is part of the bargain. Privacy has a perfume of its own. You draw the curtain back, and the bed exhaled breath folds into the larger air of the solar. Someone shakes a coverlet at the window. Sunlight strikes the dust into a brief, holy snow. It is pretty. It is filthy. It is home. You close the heavy door and the corridor cooler air feels virtuous. It isn't. It only lacks witnesses. You leave the bedchamber and pass into a narrower room with fewer windows and more chests. This is the wardrobe. Not just a cupboard, but an office, a keep within the keep. Here, cloth is counted, repaired, scented, hidden from moth and thief, and when labor allows cleaned. Its air is dense with fibers, and the things used to bully fibers into obedience. The first smell is wood and wax. Great oak coffers line the walls, iron-banded and key-heavy, each rubbed with beeswax until it shines. Lift a lid, and a different weather rises, warm wool steeped in smoke. Linen that remembers last summer's sun. Fur that cannot forget the animal it was. Between folded layers lie sweet bag, little pouches of lavender, orris root, rosemary, sometimes camphor, if the household can afford it. They fight moths and promises. They never quite win. Wool rules here. It carries a lanolin tang even after weaving oily sheepsweet, a little sour when damp. Cloaks come back from rain with that unmistakable wet wool breath that fills a room in minutes and leaves a shadow for days. Hoods and sleeves show tallow gloss where candles have nodded. Rub them and you raise a faint suet reek. Fur mantles add their own musk fox, a little rank, marten soft, a squirrel high and sharp. Brush them and the room exhales countryside. Linen is the wardrobe's conscience. Clean it is almost scentless, a cool grassy nothing that feels like honesty. But clean is a journey and the journey stinks. Down the stair past a door that never quite closes, you find the laundry. It is a workshop of tubs and steam of lye and Lansdale urine saved in great jars until it bites like hartshorn. Soap is dear and soft, made from wood ash lye and animal fat. It smells faintly acrid, faintly kitchen. Laundresses buck the linen in tubs. Ash lye poured hot through the pile, then left to steep until the cloth loosens its sins. The steam that rises is part hearth, part privy, part marsh. It coats the rafters, it coats your mouth. A bench stands ready for beetling, the beating that chases out the loosened dirt. The battledore thuds a rhythm you feel in your ribs. With each fall, a sour, lived-in breath blooms from the cloth. Rinse follows bucket trough, sometimes the river itself if the season is kind. River water has its own nose, green, stony, alive. It cleans and it contaminates in the same motion, carrying away lye while lending fish and mud. Some linens are blued to cheat the yellow pouches of powdered woad, or imported indigo dipped and swirled, until the eye believes in whiteness again. There's starch too boiled from wheat or bran. It smells like thin gruel while it cooks, and like dusty bakery when it dries, stiffening ruffs and cuffs that will soon taste the hall's grease. Vinegar makes a last sharp pass to sweeten and set. You can read the day by the laundry's haze, lye first, then steam, then starch, then sun, if you're blessed. Drying is politics with weather. On bright days, the linens are carried to the bleaching green. pegged and guarded from thieving gusts and inquisitive geese. Sun has a smell, nothing, and everything a clean that only time understands. Winter gives no such gift. Lines are strung in passage and loft. The castle becomes a damp lung. Linen dries slow, souring at the hems if it touches wood too soon. Mildew speaks softly at first, then speaks only of itself. The final touch is smoothing. Not every house has irons. Some use slick stones, hand-worn glass, or river pebble to press seams. A charcoal iron, when present, breathes a dry metallic tang and the sweet burnt scent of scorched starch. A slip and linen smells of accident for a week. Clothes do not only smell of themselves. Dyers and fullers lend them biographies. In a lean-to near the yard, dye vats burp their histories. Woad steeping like a dungy pond blooms into blue that clings to hands and air. Madder warms the steam with root and earth. Weld whispers straw and bitter tea. Mordants bite. Alum sour salty old iron like wet nails, fixing colour and adding their metallic aftertaste to cloth and courtyard alike. Beyond the fulling trough pounds new woolens with fullers, earth and lant until they felt and thicken. The mill hammer's time, the air smells of clay sheep, old piss industrial and intimate in one breath. Rinsed and dried the cloth returns to the wardrobe, haloed with that work, and will shed it slowly across years of rain and hearth. Vermin have votes in this chamber. Moths make dust of pride. Their larvae leave a faint sweet cereal smell in corners where a cloak lay too long. Fleas are politics brought to the skin. Their presence is not a scent so much as a chorus, but the powders used against them wormwood rue, pennyroyal pierce, the blend with their bitter green. In high summer, some households burn brimstone in closed chests to fumigate. Afterwards, the room tastes faintly of matches and gilt. Laundry day has its own liturgy. Baskets come up warm, the cloth sighing a little as it cools. A maid shakes a sheet, and the air flashes vinegar starch sun, underpinned by ghosts that will not go smoke from the hall onions from the kitchen. The lords pomander the baby's milk. Clean here is comparative. It is victory by inches. The first night in a fresh sheet is always a surprise, so blank you notice every newcomer. Your breath, your skin, your bedfellow's day. By morning the linen has learned you again. Wool rarely meets water. It is brushed, aired, smoked gently above a low brazier to chase damp and fleas. That smoke becomes part of the garment's soul. A winter cloak hung near the hearth for a week will smell of pine and mutton tallow until spring. A hood worn in the rain and dried by the fire will divide its loyalties between river and ash. In a castle, even your cloak is a compromise. The people who tend all this, the keeper of the wardrobe, the laundresses with red hands and lie-burnt wrists carry their trades on their skin. You can tell them on the stair the tart nip of lie, the sour bravery of lant, the faint honey of orris that tries to be kinder than the day. They are the castle's unsung noses and knuckles. If anything here approaches fresh, it is because they made it so and paid for it in breath. Open a coffer again at dusk. The room has warmed. The sweet bags have tired. The fur has woken. Somewhere a mouse has reconsidered its options. You lay the day's linen in cool as a thought and close the lid. beeswax wool dried gardens. A thread of smoke, the castle's wardrobe breathes out like a tired animal and goes still. Outside the halls, dinner thickens the air with cabbage and fat. The laundry's tubs are quiet. The steam hangs in beams and drips back to earth. Tomorrow, the cycle resumes. Cloth wears the castle, and the castle wears the cloth, and the smell between them is the seam that never mends. You follow the quiet, past the rattle and slap of the laundry tubs, past the talk in the passage. The corridor narrows and cools until the air itself seems to hush. The chapel door stands slightly ajar. You touch it with 2 fingers. It swings inward with the small pious creak of wood that has been opened 1,000 times and never oiled enough. The first breath is almost a relief. Beeswax, cold stone, a thread of resin. Here at last something like clean. The chapel is not grand few castle chapels are, but it is deliberate. Lime-washed walls hold the light. Narrow windows throw down bars of colour that lie like cloth across the floor. The air is colder than in the solar, but closer too, as if held gently in 2 hands. It smells of abstinence, less body, more breath, less grease, more candle. Beeswax rules here. Not the greasy suet of the hall's tallow dips, but clean hard tapers that burn with the faint honey. When the verger scrapes up yesterday's drips, the room sighs sweetly as the curled shavings fall into his pan. Touch a candlestick and your fingers come away with that faint polish of wax and brass like sunshine made solid. Underneath the stone speaks. Castle stone knows damp. Chapel stone keeps it. There is a persistent chill that smells of well water and lime, a mineral tongue that marks your teeth. Where the floor flags have hollowed with kneeling, you can smell the honest dust of centuries rubbed smooth by piety. Incense is not constant here, and that is its power. When the thurible swings, it is an event you can taste. The first sparks crackle in the charcoal like kindling in a dream. Then the grains go on. Frankincense bright as sunlight in resin form. Myrrh darker medicinal. Sometimes benzoin if the chest allows all vanilla and church cupboards. The smoke rises clean and white, blooming into curls that write prayers in the air. For a few minutes, the chapel belongs to it. Stone beeswax breathe everything is persuaded into a new key. Incense declares 2 things at once, that this is holy ground, and that something else here needs hiding. Priests say the smoke is the odour of sanctity. Servants say it is the best cover the castle owns. Both are right. The day's smells are stubborn. Incense sings over them, but it also kneads them into itself, wet wool. From a rain-soaked cloak, the faint ammonia of a child's accident. In the porch, the sour ghost of last week's funeral. When the censer cools, the sweetness remains, but it carries its history like a reliquary carries bone. You sit in a side stall. The wood is old oak, polished to a soft darkness by the faith of hands and the boredom of elbows. It smells of beeswax paste and winter damp with a little tang of oiled iron from the hinges. Someone has tucked sprigs of box and rosemary into a notch. Their green is sharp and hopeful. Their perfume says, Palm Sunday came and went, and the world did not end. A book lies on the lectern. Parchment is not paper. It has a smell like a careful cupboard. Vellum breathes lightly of the animal it once was, mellowed by lime and time. The ink on its skin is iron gallstony, faintly metallic like rain in a skillet. Turn a page and you lift a century. The leather binding adds its own deep note, warmed by hands fed with fat now bordering on must. The choir stalls keep other perfumes. Boys smell of smoke and soap and the run from the yard. The clerk smells of ink and worry. The priest smells of linen and oil, chrysmolive oil scented with balsam, kept in tiny ampullae in the sacristy, sweet as evergreen, and used to draw crosses on foreheads and doors. Open the little silver box and the whole chapel sharpens, as if it recognizes the smell of its purpose. And yet for all this effort, the chapel is not sealed from the castle. A draught under the door imports a whisper of the halls. Morningale and onion-warm dog, the civilized stink of many. The garderobe along the wall has an outside shaft, but its memory seeps regardless. Even holy doors cannot bar a smell that has found the grain of the wood. Somewhere above, pigeons have discovered a loose slate in the bellcote. Their guano adds its thin high note to the tower stair chalk and salt and neglect. The bell ropes themselves, tarred hemp, carry the harbour in them. Touch one and your hands are shipmen for an hour. Look down and you will see the reason incense never quite wins. The floor is strewn with rushes newer here than in the hall, truer to their green beginnings, sprinkled with sweet herbs that assert themselves bravely whenever a foot disturbs them. But even piety drops crumbs. The pious cough too. Babies spit up during mass. Old men leak a little when they kneel and rise. The chapel collects the castle's hopes, and its leaks with equanimity, and it keeps both. On feast days the air swells. Flowers come in from the garden or the hedgerow's lilies. If someone is extravagant, glorious for an hour, then too much roses for the Virgin, bruised and generous meadowsweet underfoot, so the whole room walks on honey. The incense is richer, the choir louder, the candles more. For a shallow breath you could believe the chapel is the opposite of the yard. Then the service ends. The door opens. The castle reclaims its air. Death belongs here more reliably than joy. The requiem has its own recipe for smell. Beeswax in quantity, resin without stint, wool black dyed with oak gallsit's new bitterness, astringent as tea. The bier's boards are fresh scrubbed, the rope bites. The mourners sweat grief into good cloth. When the coffin lid lifts, there is a hush that includes the nose. Even the best managed corpse speaks. Herbs help rosemary bay, a handful of hyssop if the herbarium is generous laid about the face and under the pall. The castle knows this odour. It is why so many candles. Beneath your feet there are graves. In a city church, the dead might turn the air sweet in high summer. In a castle, stone lids and shallow vaults keep their peace, except when something shifts or opens. Then for a week, the chapel wears a reminder that salvation is a bodily business. Slip into the sacristy, the chapel's wardrobe, and another chapter opens. Vestments hang in a little warmth linen albs that smell faintly of lye and starch. Silks that carry silks, dry, spicy hush. Embroidered copes that exhale camphor and cupboard. There is sweat here, too light and honest, trapped under the collar where devotion rubs for an hour at a time. The thurible rests on a stone shelf, cold now, but fragrant still, the chain bitten with resin in its links. A cruet stands half full. Sacramental wine is a tame sweetness, more church than vineyard. Spilled on the stone, it turns to a faint ecclesiastical vinegar and stays as a circle long after the penance is done. On the sill, a bucket and aspergillum wait for blessings. Holy water is only water until it isn't. It smells of iron and bucket and a priest's thumb. When it is flung, it brings cold air with it, and for a moment the chapel brightens as if rain had troubled a pond. You sit a little longer. In time, your nose picks out the contradictions and makes peace with them. The chapel promises purity and offers mixture. It declares eternity and smells of work. It is the best the castle can do, and very good at that, yet it cannot exile the world outside its door. Incense does not erase, it crowns. Beeswax does not cleanse, it consoles. The stone remembers everything. When you step back into the corridor, the difference is immediate. The hall has begun to boil its noon. The kitchen sends up onion and steam. From far off the moat sighs algae into the heat. You carry the chapel with you. Nonetheless, a thread of resin in your hair, a fingertip of wax on your sleeve, a gentler breath in your chest. Holiness has a smell. So does history. In this place they are the same thing, and both of them are mortal. You leave the sweetness of beeswax and resin and take the smaller door beside the sacristy, the one not everyone uses. It sticks. The priest's key turns with the complaint of iron that has learnt patience. The air on the other side is colder, older. Stone eats sound here. Your feet know it first. Your nose knows it next. It smells of shut earth, not fresh soil, not garden after rain, but the breath of ground that has been kept from wind. Lime and damp, the faint salt of weeping walls, a dust like old books and old cupboards, and the back of a drawer you haven't opened in years. The chapel sat above like a polished hymn. The crypt below is the same hymn with the vowels taken out. Steps drop steeply. They are worn to a smooth saddle in the middle from centuries of careful tread. The lantern the verger gives you burns low, its smoke tasting of old oil. The flame gilds the edges of salt that has bloomed on the stone, a white fur of saltpeter that powder men like to scrape a mineral tang on the tongue. Water finds its way anywhere it can. In winter it beads and drips. In summer it simply breathes. The smell is colder than the temperature. People say that as a comfort. Down here it is a fact. Cold has a smell when it has nothing else to do. The first chamber keeps coffins. Some are stone chests with lids carved in the likeness of the sleeping hands. Folded dogs at feet, lions keeping watch. Stone has no scent of its own, but the carved lines hold dust, and the dust has its ancestry in everything that ever happened in this place. Some lids are uncarved slabs, cold and plain. Along one wall later, burials sit in lead shells inside wooden coffins. Lead has a taste more than a smell, metallic and tired like coins handled too long. The wood, even sealed, still exhales resin and old glue, and if the joiner was lazy, a faint mouse. If a lid has shifted, The settling of earth a clumsy foot, the air near it is different. Not full, not flagrantly foul, just a thin, sweet oddness that makes the mouth water and the throat try to forget. The verger straightens the slab with more care than strength. Best not, he says, and that is theology enough. On a shelf are reliquaries, little boxes of bone and brass, and their fragrance is the chapels, not the crypts, beeswax, and the breath of hands that have polished faith. But look across to the corner, and you find what no reliquary can sweeten a table for the work the living must do for the dead. Winding cloths folded and kept pins in a cup, a small pot of myrrh hardened to a resinous tear, a strip of linen that still holds the ghost of rose water from the last time a lady's face was wiped. These are honest scents, frank about what they cover and what they can't. Not everybody rests long where it is first put. Ground is dear inside walls, and time is greedy. After some years, the grave is opened, and what remains is lifted, the bones cleaned reverently and carried elsewhere. The first air that rises then is memorable earth, certainly. Linen, if any, survives. Sometimes a waxy, fatty tang from flesh that never quite did what flesh is supposed to do. That last smell has no medieval name, but every medieval nose knew it. Come, says the verger, and he leads you through a low arch to the oldest part of the undercroft. Here the ceiling crouches. Rough niches gape in the walls. A bat frets past and is gone, leaving a high, chalky whiff. The floor is uneven, a map of ancient decisions. Someone chose this place, and later, someone chose to reuse it. At the far end, a small door opens to the charnel. It is not a room most visitors see, and the verger does not light it fully. One lantern is enough. Skulls gaze back tidy, as a counting house eye holes rimmed with dust. Long bones are paired stacked, nested like kindling. Smaller bones ride in baskets, a domestic detail so plain it catches at your breath. The smell here is not rot. Rot has had its day. What's left is mineral chalk lime, old linen mouse, the faintest thread of attic apples gone to paper. It is like a library that forgot its letters and kept only its pages. Rub a finger across a femur and the dust tastes of cave. You are mouth and nose and salt and sermon at once. Why keep bones? The living need space. The dead need nearness. The resurrection is a geography problem. Keeping a household's remains within the walls solves it neatly and spares the yard. So the sexton clears a grave when its turn comes, washes the bones with wine or vinegar, lays them to dry on clean cloth. Vinegar has a voice, sharp, righteous, and then stacks them here, labeled by memory, if not by name. Incense visits sometimes and lingers on brow ridges and in the cavities of eyes in a way that would be comic if it were not so ordinary. In plague years, and every castle has had a year that remembered itself. That way there was no time for courtesy. Lime was flung quick and eager, spitting heat when it met flesh. Quicklime has its own breath-hot, chalky, clean and cruel. It blinded the nose to everything else for an hour and gave the living something to tell themselves. Later, when the ground made room again, the charnel swelled. The smell, then less charter more chorus. There are stories about skulls that sweat about water beading on stone lids before bad news. Down here, water beads on anything it can. The stories simply know their setting. What is true is simpler. The crypt remembers weather. In summer, a sweetness creeps where you hoped there wasn't one. In winter, your breath smokes and smells of iron. The candles gutter more here. Tallow sulks and leaves a greasy rim that clings to carvings and beeswax. Even at its politest will stutter and drip in the draught from a shaft you cannot see. Ropes hang for bells above. The fibers smell of tar and damp hemp. When the bells are rung, the dust shivers, and a tiny rain of ancient air falls on your face. You taste century. There is also art down here, if you can call it that. A transier cadaver monument carved in stone. A lord in his prime on the upper slab, and his bared bones beneath ribs like the slats of a thin door. Stone does not smell, but the idea does. It smells of lye and rush mats and everything you have met in this castle, set under one sentence. As I am, you shall be. A sermon shorter than incense. The verger sets the lantern by it and lets the silence stand. You can hear water somewhere counting. Drops land a long way off and talk to the back of your neck. On your way out, you pass the place where old candles are scraped for tapers anew. The pan is full of clip-ins and crumbs, the scent of beeswax, thick and consoling as cake. It does help. It always helps. But even sweetness has a limit. The crypt borrows what it can from the chapel above, braids it with lime adds, bat adds, brass adds, centuries, and returns it to you as honesty. At the stair, the air changes only slightly, but enough that your shoulders believe it before your lungs do. The chapel's resin threads back in. The sacristy offers linen and camphor. You climb. At the threshold, you look back, and the lantern paints the first step in gold. Everything beyond remains old pewter. The door shuts with its learned creak. You are back among candles and hymns and the domestic politics of breath. But your nose has been educated, and knowledge does what it always does. It makes things permanent. If anyone asks you why castles smelt like death, you could take them to the yard, to the garderobe, to the kitchens, to the moat. Or you could bring them here and let them breathe once. Stone keeps everything. The chapel lends its honey and its smoke. The crypt returns the favor with lime and bone. Between those two, the whole place lives. You carry a dusting of it with you now, salt on your lip, resin in your hair, a memory of chalk where your tongue met air. You will taste water differently for a day. You will know what damp means. And when you pass the chapel again and a thurible swings, you will love the incense more for what it cannot do. You come up from bone and lime into life again and find it gnawing. A castle is a storehouse as much as a stronghold. Wherever food cloth and warmth are gathered, something smaller gathers to claim its share. You can hear them first if you're quiet. The shy grit of a tooth through wood, the dry rustle of a body slipping behind a sack, the whisper of wing or leg against plaster. You can smell them too. Rats announce themselves. Not like stables or kitchens. No public parade, but by a persistent sour musk, greasy and old, that hangs in corners where people rarely kneel to scrub. Follow the smell, and you'll find their runs, blackish lines along skirting and stone, where their fur has polished a path. A brown bead of droppings tucked into a crease behind a chest. A gnawed edge to a grain sack that smells of dust and mouse-sweet grain in the same breath. Lift the sack and a column of air rises meal burlap urine. You swallow and tell yourself it's only the store. Rats smell of damp rope, of gutter, of kitchen night. Wet, they give off a high ammoniac tang like the stables in miniature. Dry, they are old cupboards and oil. Kill one, and you learn the truth quickly. Warm metal, then a fast sourness, then the odd, rancid tallow of a small body cooling. The dogs will take them. The smell will linger where they bled. Mice are tidier, but more numerous. Their spoor is cereal sweet and faint. Open a coffer in the wardrobe, and you may catch a ghost of it, along with the nibble that turned a fur's edge to fringe. A mouse nest in straw smells of bread and wool. You almost forgive them until you find the hole in the sleeve. The castle fights back with cats, slim, superior creatures with their own perfumes, dusty sun, and warm fur by day, rancid rankness when a Tom decides a chest is his. Their spray writes a signature harsher than any rat. Still, the rat catcher swears by them, and by his terriers, game little drums of muscle that smell of leather collars, old blood, and delight. For the deeper runs, he brings a ferretta, musky rope of intent and slides it into the wall. Ferret breath is ferrous and wild. It brings back a whiff of the warren into a room that thought itself civilized. Traps are set deadfalls that smell faintly of pitch clay jars, baited with rancid fat boards, smeared with bird limey. That green, sticky stink of holly bark boiled to glue. Poison is spoken of more than used. The castle cannot spare a loaf to kill what eats loaves, and poison makes corpses where dogs might find them later and learn an expensive lesson. Where rats go, fleas go with them. You cannot smell a flea, but you can smell the powders used to plague them. Pennyroyals, bitter green ruse, cat-hating sting wormwood like a dry forest underfoot. Bedding is dusted. Rush mats are strewn with herb. A brazier smokes the solar with brimstone until every chest tastes faintly of struck match and throat. For a day, the itch quietens. A week later, the seams pepper again. Lice keep their own court head and body both. They have a smell if you know it, old linen and salt and intimacy shared too widely. Combs lifted from a hot scalp bring up the steam of hair knits that pop faintly between nails, a thin animal tang. Soap helps, so does shearing. Winter hates both. Bedbugs if the bed has the mare worse. Crush one and the room admits it, a sharp almond coriander reek that seems too clean to belong to filth, and for that reason offends twice. They live in the cracks of bedsteads and the seams of curtains, breathing in the warm exhale of sleep, adding their tiny stale spice to the bedchamber's bouquet. Grain has its own enemies. Lift a lid and see it shift slightly. Not rats now, but weevil's meal moth larve. Little lives that turn wheat to dust while smelling faintly of stale flour and cupboard. A sack gone bad tells on itself when you cut the cord. The breath that rises is mold and mouse and something flatly old. You learn to hold it away from your face. The kitchens fight flies as much as fire. A blue bottle is a loud thing, metallic even in sound, and it smells of what it loves meat, sweet rot, the midden heap in miniature. The stable fly carries the yard to the carving board. Cheesecloths hang over trenchers, but the mesh catches smell as much as insects. Old milk, damp hemp, a sourness that ripens under the cloth on hot days. The spit turns fat spits. A blowfly beats the window and the room twitches. In summer, the castle hums. The moat hatches midges. The privies serve a banquet. The kitchen door frames a droning crosswind. Maggots have a smell, not merely rot, but a wet sweetness, a broth beginning to think. The dogs know it. They pull away from a corner where a bucket tipped and was half swept. A maid throws ash. The smell flattens, but does not go. Where water sits, mosquitoes write their thin whine into the corridor. A candle lifts it, the next candle makes it worse. Pigeons belong to towers as much as bells. In some places there's a dovecote proud as taxes, and it smells of chalky guano warm feather seed. Useful bird's meat in winter message in war, yet their droppings climb stone like lichen and burn lead like an acid. In the belfry, mites give the ropes a living itch, and the stair tastes of dust and salt and neglect. Hawks help outdoors. Indoors, the broom does what the hawk cannot. Flies breed in the midden and vote in the kitchen. Rats breed under the stair and vote in the buttery. Fleas breed in rushes and vote in the bed. The castle answers with lime in the heap, a clean, chalky bite, with smoke in the room's pine, when there's pine dung, when there isn't, with lime wash on walls, wet chalk, then a hopeful new house smell. For a day all is chastened. By week's end the voters return. The infirmary knows this better than any room. Wound dressings lure flies. Herbs rebuke them. A gauze of spider silk sometimes veils a cut and brings with it the dusty attic smell of webs gathered from rafters. Leeches are kept in jars that smell of pond. When they are fed, the room acquires a low metallic burp. The healer burns rosemary on the shovel and swings it like a censer. The smoke says not today to the air. Outside, carrion crows and kites patrol the midden and the path below the wall. Their presence is tidier than we admit. They smell of wind and meat and iron beak. When a scrap is tossed from the kitchen door, the yard learns the fast shadow of a wing and the thin skirling cry that means waste will not last long enough to turn scandalous. In years of pestilence, the flea becomes more than a bite. It becomes a rumor carried on breath. People will not know the flea is to blame, not properly, but their noses learn to fear the combination. Stale rushes, hot bodies, a yard too quiet, a sweet bitter oddness on a patient's skin. Rosemary is stuffed into belts and bosoms. Posies bloom on every wrist. Vinegar is sipped. The air becomes a pharmacy. The castle smells like effort and prayer, and still the fleas vote. Listen at night, and you can hear the truce that isn't. Something scratches in the wainscot. The cat's bell answers. A dog growls, then sighs and dreams on. The moon draws a track across the floor where a moth falters, powdering the air with a faint talc-like breath. A candle tunnels into itself. The tallow puddle sets domestic and greasy, ready to take a flea's foot at dawn. By morning, the keepers begin again. Herb is strewn sharp green, full of promise. Ash is thrown dry, grey honest. Traps are checked, a small guilty triumph. Lime is slaked, spits, and hisses clean as a lie. The castle smells of a war that cannot be won, Only Managida, war waged, knows first. You step into the yard and the sun turns everything louder. The midden lifts its chorus, the dovecote chuckles, a cat stretches like a question mark and leaves a line of musk in the air as surely as chalk. Somewhere a boy laughs as a rat catcher tips a barrow of trophies into a pit and sprinkles lime that smokes like a benediction. It smells of victory for an hour. Then the moat breathes, the kitchen opens, the day votes again. You smell the siege before you see it. It begins with pitch. The tubs are dragged from storage lids, levered off with a grunt, and the stuff goes to the boil in iron cauldrons along the wall walk. The first bubbles break with a breath, like tar and forest fire together, pine smoke and something blacker, older. A boy brings bundles of faggots, resin spits. The cauldrons talk. Men rub bowstrings with wax. The room for harness stinks of oil and old leather as hauberks are hauled down from pegs and buckles woken with grease. Fear sharpens sweat. It has a sour edge you recognize from the infirmary, only quicker. The gates shut and the air changes. The yard crowds at once. Peasants from the outbuildings bring in what they can, chickens under arms, a pig dragged squealing sacks that smell of damp grain and panic. The rushes in the hall haven't been changed. Now they never will be. New bodies roll, bedding out on the daz. Fleas vote with both feet. The dogs are beside themselves, meat on the spit, strangers in their place, the pitch breathing from the parapet like bad weather. Children cry until their throats rasp. The sound brings its own hoarseness to the room. The kitchens go from generous to grudging in a day. Fat is counted meat salted harder pea and barley pots thickened then thinned. Cabbage water becomes a presence. It smells like surrender, but tastes like survival. Old bones are boiled twice. The steam carries yesterday back into today. The baker fires half the loaves he would like and stares at the flour chest as if it were a map of the future. Water becomes a noses problem. The well rope squeaks and leaves wet hemp on your hands. The bucket smells of iron and sour rope, and everyone knows the level by sound. Vinegar is splashed in jugs to sweeten the draw. That gives the day a sharp halo that does not quite mask the truth. When the level dips too far, men take poles and try to skim cleaner feed from the moat-boiled yes with charcoal yes, and the steam that rises smells of broth that has lost hope. The garderobes fill faster. The wind shifts. The shafts cough their news into passages you had thought were private. A new trench is cut behind a screen near the stables. Lime is thrown with an eager, chalky hiss. The smell makes the men feel better. It does not make the smell better. Then the enemy's engines begin and stone learns to speak. The first thump is a novelty. The second throws dust from the mortar joints. The 50th coats your tongue with lime and anger. When a block goes, the air turns to a storm of grit-dree bitter, bright as knives. Carters drag wet hides up to the threatened angle. The hides bring their own life-tannery river beast. A fire arrow slaps the hide and dies with a hiss that smells of singed hair and wet dog. Somewhere below, a pot of sand is stirred and stirred until the grains click like teeth. When tipped heated sand has a smell, the smell of burnt verge and hot glass that you will never forget. On the wall walk, men sweat in iron and old wool. Close work has a closeness all its own. Hot breath souring inside a nasal helm, oiled mail going high and metallic in the sun, tallow from a candle wiped on a strap in haste. A windlass creaks. The grease on its pawl smells like a cartwright's hands. A crossbow smiles and bites. The quarrel goes, and the bowstring gives off a tiny ghost of wax. Not every siege is the same century. In some years, the thunder is new barrels of serpentines coughing a smoke like rotten eggs and charcoal. The saltpeter bite of gunpowder tangling with pitch and fear. The air tells you the calendar even if the walls pretend not to know. Inside, fear finds its level and stays there. The chapel fills. Incense is brought out more than the chest can justify. Resin burns until the room is white as Saint's Day and twice as breathless. Beeswax melts in drooling ropes that smell of honey and haste. Prayers grow loud, then hoarse, then low. After the office, the door opens and the castle reclaims its people. Resin follows them into the hall and sticks to their day like hope that won't scrub. The infirmary swells, wound metal rules the air, vinegar tallow and the iron of blood. A cautery is set. When it meets flesh, the room admits it, pig roast without the feast. Salves bring herbiaro, comfrey, bad-tempered sage. All of it is folded into the larger smell of sweat you can't put down. Dressings are boiled, the steam arguing with the lime bucket by the door. A boy is brought in with a stone bruise the size of a plate. His breath smells of crushed teeth and fear. He lives. Another's breath sweetens and goes thin. He does not. Food goes to rules. The kitchen ledger smells of ink and bad arithmetic. Horse has a day, a dense sweetish stink from the boiler. Men eat without looking at their hands. Hides are scraped for glue. A pot of it sets by the fire, and the hall learns anew knows old shoes and library paste and hunger. Someone jokes about boiling belts. No one laughs. Dogs go lean, then quiet. Pigs are scolded into silence with a stick. Even their pen smells doubtful, as if the animals know something about futures that people won't only say. Smoke from the hearth is less. The chimneys draw badly with all the vents half choked for heat. The air stacks and sulks. Children develop the castle cough by noon. The nights are longer than the days. Torches in the passage drip resin onto rush mats that were already treacherous. The smell of pitch and singe becomes the smell of the hour. Men piss in corners no steward will remember. By morning, the corner remakes the day. A sentry's brazier eats charcoal and spits its dry metallic breath along the wall. The stars smell nearer in the wind, and someone weeps because the night carries cooking from a camp that is not theirs. At some point there is parley. It has a scent too wet wool stale breath, the beeswax of the chapel dragged out into the cold to bless a talk that will be about bread and honor and the arithmetic of children. The enemy's herald smells of horse and wine and victory he thinks he already owns. When he leaves the gatehouse, keeps a thread of his pomander as if the walls had opinions. The dead belong to both sides and to none. Bodies are hauled to the moat and tip the air along the bank, going high and wrong. Quicklime is thrown. It hisses a flat amen. Flies write their bright black on the afternoon. Kites learn the new path to the wall. In the crypt, the verger clears a corner and pretends it is a plan. Beeswax struggles, and being decent people, they let it. Dysentery arrives as it always does when numbers outrun privies. You know it by sound first, then by a smell that makes kitchens falter, acid, sudden alive. The trench behind the screen becomes a lesson no herb can pass. Vinegar is drunk. Rosemary is tied in kerchiefs. The day learns to count to the next hour and no farther. At last rain, the smell of it on dusty stone is a kind of mercy-wet lime, clean, cold, a rinsing that is more romance than fact. The engines still throw, the hides still steam. The moat now stinks as it stirs, giving back what it has kept. Inside the hall steams 2 cloaks hair dogs, the whole room a wash of animal and damp hearth. Candles smoke and sulk. Someone sings to the baby because the baby does not know what a wall is for. Only that walls hold songs the way pots hold soup. The bell rings for prime and smells of tarred rope and old hands. The day repeats. The castle breathes its dark breath and calls it morning because morning has arrived and has not asked permission. If anyone should ever tell you that siege is a matter of stones and courage, tell them about the air. Tell them it is fear and pitch and stale linen vinegar and hot sand glue and wet dog incense and iron quicklime and cabbage and the breath of too many in too small a room. Tell them the castle smells not like death under siege, but like lives jammed against the fact of it. The wall holds, or it doesn't. Either way, the smell will choose the same words for the end of this day: smoke, sour salt, and tired. The first change is in the wind. All night it had smelt of pitch and old breath of rope-scorched palms, and the sourness of a hall packed too tight. At dawn, the air tilts, and something unfamiliar threads it a smell with a direction. Not just smoke, not just fear, news. You stand on the wall walk and sniff like the dogs do. Down in the yard, a boy has climbed a buttress for a better view. A steward hisses him down, then keeps looking himself. The moat wears a ruffle. The bell's rope is in a hand, though no one dares ring. Then the shout goes up. It smells of wet wool and joy, relief. They come with banners and bread. The Allies column smells like a travelling market horse and leather iron and grease sackcloth and dust. There's a clean note terrain on harness, cold air shaken from cloaks that feels like a door opened in your chest. When the gates stir, the portcullis grates and throws down a breath of stale iron from grooves not moved in a week. Men push at the leaves of oak. Their hinges answer with a long, thick sigh, the smell of old oil woken. The first cart in is not wine or powder, but flour. The sack breathes out a dry reassurance. The baker swears, laughs and cries all at once. There is cheese turning its honest pong into promise. Onions sharp and hopeful. Salt fish with its seaside tang that suddenly reads as plenty rather than punishment. A wet-nosed barrel thuds down and opens into beer. The room learns at once how thirsty it has been. The air in the gate passage changes from caution to kitchen. Outside the walls, the enemy fire gutters. Pitch pots cool, and the wind that had driven their smoke into your lungs now brings the bite of quenched charcoal and trampled grass. The wall itself exhales mortar dust for an hour and then begins to smell of rain again. Inside, everything knocks into everything else. The chapel's door is flung wide and resin pours into the corridor like white water. The Te Deum raises beeswax to a height it hasn't seen since Easter. The air is suddenly sweet and salty in scents and tears. Boys who had learnt to be still forget. Their bodies steam. The stalls smell of leather and breath and relief as physical as heat. In the hall, rushes lift under brooms and a whole season stands up. Cabbage water, old ale dog. Herb follows in a bright green ribbon meadow sweet and rosemary shaken from baskets, and for once it seems to win. The first proper loaf is torn hot, the crust snaps and the crumb steams butter into the air. That smell climbs the rafters like news. The steward parcels meat with a miser's hand and a father's face. The kitchen announces rabbit stew as if it were a coronation. The boil is clean, the fat new, even the pottage seems younger. Men take off their harness at last. Metal's breath fades. The room warms to wool and skin that have decided they will live. Children sleep in odd places and smell of bread. Dogs lie like furniture, twitching aisles of dried mud forming under them as if the castle were molting its fear. Vinegar gives way at last to ale. The garderobe lines shorten. The trench behind the stable is limed and covered. The lime's chalky blessing rises and dissipates, filing itself under yesterday. On the wall, a last pot of pitch skins over. What rises from it now is not threat, but tar on a summer road. Somewhere a bowstring is unwaxed. Wax has a domestic voice when it is not afraid. Relief turns air into a feast. It is not clean, it will never be clean, but it is generous. Or else the day bends the other way. You know it before the gates. The wind changes and brings you meat in the wrong key. Smoke that is not hearth, a sweetness that is not kitchen, a note like singed hair plaited with hot iron. The engines have fallen silent, but the silence has weight. The bell is not in a hand. The yard is too tidy. Fear tidies. Then there is a thud at the postern, quiet as a cough. A lock answers, and the gatehouse begins to smell of men who think themselves clever. Ruin. They come fast and smell of victory wine dried into a shirt, horses that have not been walked off armor oiled with someone else's grease. Ropes squeal. The chains move like a throat that does not want to swallow. The portcullis climbs and leaves a line of old iron on the air. The first breath through the gate is not bread but torch. Resin green wood rag dipped in oil. The door's own smoke as the heads brush the lintel. Fire has a voice you know. This is its swagger. A man laughs in a way that spoils the smell of it forever. The yard becomes a butcher's stall in a minute, and then a midden. Pigs scream. A hen explodes into feathers that carry the stink of burnt quill. A jug breaks and sours the stones. The wine is good enough that its ghost fights back fringe of grape around the edges of the rot. The first knocked platter spreads cabbage across the rushes and turns the room into winter all at once. The second spreads blood and turns it into something else. Doors that always opened on beeswax and Latin now open on boot. The chapel fills with smoke without incense's excuse. The candles do their best and die. The stall wood learns new sweat. The sacristy coughs camphor and linen from a chest dragged hard. A vestment falls and smells for one stupid second of last palm tide. Then the man who stepped on it sneezes pepper and laughs. The solar loses its grammar. Curtains that kept warmth keep smuts. A chest splinters and gives up lavender and mouse and a private life all at once. The bedstead speaks bedbug and feather and fear. A warming pan clatters, releases a thin breath of old brass and scorched starch, and becomes a weapon if a hand is near enough. The close stool lid lifts and tips. The smell that had been politely contained all siege long stands in the room and introduces itself. The hall tries for dignity and achieves noise. A banner falls and smells of dust and dye. Someone wipes a blade on it and adds iron. Dog howls are briefly everywhere. Musk panic, the sharp stink of a hound that has been kicked, and then dog is gone. The rushes take what they always take, and their bottom layer, the sour, ancient middle of the hall, rises like a verdict. Pillaging has its own bouquet, and you will never mistake it again. Hot leather lamp oil, wet ash, spilt, mash, new urine in an old corner, feathers pitch on boot soles, iron fresh from meat. The thin sugar note that means a cupboard of fruit was found and ruined. Beeswax melted sideways and wiped with a sleeve. Add to that the chalky hiss of quicklime thrown hurriedly where blood collects, someone's idea of civility, and you have the recipe the chronicles never write. Smoke changes color when it eats walls. Oak is a warm breath. Wattle is hair and clay. Limewash makes chalk soup in your nose. Straw roofs add harvest. Wet thatch adds pond. The keep's stair becomes a lung. It drags air from every room and offers it to the sky as a confession. Outside, the moat catches what it always catches. The smell turns from lazy to busy, from algae to after. Kites come in on cue, neat as accountants. The bell. If it rings wrong, tarred hemp, panic hands, a note that knows it is late. Relief and ruin share one odd kinship by evening. The castle smells like a decision that cannot be unmade. In relief, the decision is bread. The kitchen's steam is human again. Beeswax wins a little herbs, lift beer, breath laughs. The infirmary still smells of vinegar and iron, but there are fewer pallets and more broth. The wall cools under rain. The yard forgets to be tidy. Dogs snore, cats patrol. The lime pit crusts over and becomes yesterday's problem. In ruin, the decision is ash. Even after buckets and prayers, the air keeps a black stripe through it you can't wash from your hair. The chapel takes on the scent of a blackened kettle. The crypt opens because it must, and bone breathes lime. The cellars steam, split ale and wet grain go sweet and then wrong. The laundry tries, with lye, with lant, with soap that smells of kitchen, but smoke eats first and best. For weeks you'll pick cinders from cuffs and sleep in a bed that dreams fire. Either way, by night you can tell the truth from the wall walk without seeing. Relief carries frying onions and the flat, sober note of small ale. Ruin carries damp charcoal and the thin fear of what isn't accounted for yet. The stars smell the same. That is their job. You go down at last. If fortune was kind, you pass a table with a heel of cheese and the steam of a clean pot. If fortune was not, you pass a brazier that won't draw and a room that smells of someone else's boots. You bank the fire or you do not have one to bank. You lie on straw that either remembers siege or wishes it still had that to remember. Sleep smells of what came in through the gate. Morning after relief smells like wet chalk and warm bread. Morning after ruin smells like wet ash and vinegar. Either way, the castle wakes to work. The first job is air. Shutters are propped with pegs. Horn panes nudged ajar. Door bars lifted. The keep exhales. A draft runs the length of the passage and gathers everything. The last weeks left behind. Fear, sweat, candle smoke, cabbage water, stale ale, and tries to drag it out through arrow slits that were never meant to be lungs. The wind answers with its own cargo rain, off Stone River, cold a touch of nettles from the ditch where men trampled a path in the dark. In the great hall, the rushes are lifted at last. The top layer comes away, dryish, aromatic for a heartbeat. Beneath is the year you tried not to live, black-matted, slick in places, a smell like a midden that learned Latin. Men with forks heave the felted mass into barrows. Women scatter fresh bundles of green rush and meadowsweet. Lime dust is shaken over the bare flags, a chalky, clean bite that makes throats cough and consciences feel tidy. For an hour, the hall smells of new-mown river and schoolroom. Soot is next. From hearth to rafters, the fire's handwriting is everywhere. A sweep's brush bundled birch and bell, resin-tarred ropes cause the flue. Soot falls in a soft, smothering gust that smells of last winter and last night at once. Tapestries are unhooked, shouldered outside, and beaten until they snow, their history smoke moth feast lent. The beating itself has a scent-hot wool, old dye, warmed by sun, and a sound that makes the yard look up. Woodwork is scrubbed with lye water soapy sharp. A little kitchen, a little laundry. Worn trestles bleed a brown that smells of gravy you cannot quite name. The steward watches the rinse bucket like a diviner when it clouds quicker than it used to. He nods and calls for more hot water. Cleaning is arithmetic done with nose and pail, then the walls. Mortar has fallen where stones took the enemy's temper. Masons set up beside the breach with a trough shovels and sacks of quicklime. Slaking is a small miracle every time. Water meets lime and hisses spits, steam-shot chalk and eggshell, a tang that catches high in the nose. Sand is folded in by spade. The mix goes to a paste with a smell like wet beach and new promise. Trowels chatter. When fresh mortar kisses old stone, the air sharpens as if the castle remembered how to be a quarry. The sound is hopeful. The scent is cleaner than anything in a fortress has a right to be. Plasterers follow where rooms cracked. Their hawks carry gauging plaster that breathes gently of lime and hair. Wattle peeps where daub has failed. Hazel that still knows hedge. The daub itself is made new, clay-chopped straw and dung from the stable. There's no pretense about that smell stable moved indoors, yet as the wall takes it, and the lime breath rises, the reek tames. Drying turns muck into masonry. The nose admits it grudgingly respectful. When surfaces are mended, the lime wash comes out buckets of milky chalk, a scent like fresh plaster and a rain barrel stirred. Brushes slap. White runs down to meet stone floors in tidy drips. Suddenly, rooms widen. Even the air sounds paler. For a day, the castle smells like a monastery, wet lime, quiet pride, a vanishing of stains beneath a doctrine of white. Roofs have their own chapter. If the thatch took fire or merely sulked under weeks of rain, the thatchers clamber up with ladders that smell of creek water and pitch. Reeds arrive shining and clean from the marshes, their green-brown breath, the first truly untroubled smell the place has had in months. Bundles creak, cords rasp. A pot of tar softens in the sun. It gives off summer road and shipyard in a low, contented hum. New thatch smells like river and harvest. Old thatch smells like winter and rat. Today, mercifully, you get the first. Where roofs are timbered and slated, the carpenters go to work. New green oak is a perfume all its own, sap sour, tannic, winey. Saws sing resin, augers breathe iron and oak together. Pegs split and driven release a quick, clean pop of wood. Hide glue warms on a brazier nearby animal and library paste, intimate and industrious. The joiner's bench smells like planed shavings and truth. Metalwork returns to its music. The smith's hearth starved during siege swells again. Coal and old iron hoof and horn his smoke writes a blacker note than kitchen smoke edged with metal's lemony tang. Grease warms on the anvil face. The first hammer blow lifts a smell that is almost citrus. Nails are born, hinges reset. A lock that sulked becomes polite under oil that knew olives once, then water and the lies it tells. The moat is roused. Men with hooks drag at what should not be there, a barrel stave slick with rot, a branch that has played siege ladder, a carcass if you were unlucky. The water that comes with each haul smells of silt, pondweed, and what the last weeks dared to say in the dark. Upend the hook, and it becomes the yard's problem. The lime pit opens, and hisses a chalked amen. Ducks argue as if they have opinions on engineering. Perhaps they do. The well winch is greased. The rope bites the palm less harshly. The first clear bucket after a week of caution smells like miracle cold stone iron lip and nothing else. Women laugh into it and tell each other off for wasting. No one means it. Cloth must be convinced to live again. The laundry smokes like a little valley. Lye is boiled ash and water lifting their acrid himnandlant is poured from jars that argue with every nose in the yard. Bucking tubs fill. Steam climbs with a smell, part kitchen, part privy, and wholly necessary. Beetling boards thud. Linen exhales sour, then settles towards clean. A pot of starch mumbles porridge, ghost-adding bakery to the mix. In the bleaching field, pegs bite new holes into cuffs that will not notice until Yule. Sun does what soap cannot and leaves nothing behind except the idea of sky. Wool is brushed, aired, smoked lightly above a brazier scented with rosemary. The fur chest is open to daylight. Moth powder pricks and powders the throat. A fumigation of brimstone is dared in the worst coffer. Afterwards, the room tastes of matches and victory. The chapel is put right before the hall has finished. Ash is scraped from the altar stones. Beeswax tapers are trimmed and polished until they smell like their own hymn. The sacristy is re-shelved chrism, tight-stoppered linens aired, and the thurible is fed a fist of resin. When Mass is said for Thanksgiving, or for the dead incense takes the building like weather, its sweetness this time sits more firmly on lime wash and less anxiously on fear. Even the crypt open to sort the last grim arithmetic breathes cleaner under it. Not clean, never clean, cleaner. After ruin there is the tidying of ghosts. Blood hides in seams and stair corners. Vinegar water searches it out metallic and moral. Quicklime is sprinkled where decency cannot reach. The hiss is brisk, the scent a chalk palette. Cleanser the castle has learnt to rely on. Pieces of life are swept, a child's bead, a bone, dye a torn pomander, leaking cloves into dust. The yard smells of tallow polish, where someone has decided that shining a chair leg is a blow struck for civilization. Dogs reappear as if conjured by crumbs. Their musk is ordinary again, which is to say comforting. Cats resettle their borders, leaving small hot flags in doorways, as if to say, this is remembered. The rat catcher makes a last parade to the pit. Lime smokes softly. The stink is smaller than yesterday's. Men joke as if they never lost the trick. By the end of a week, the castle smells like itself again, only younger in places. Lime wash still whispers in passages. New oak speaks when the sun hits. The hall carries fresh, river-sweet rushes under the honest base of ale and meat. The kitchen has rediscovered onions for reasons other than ration, and onion announces itself cheerfully. The laundry begins to smell less of lye and more of wind. The moat sulks like a farm rather than a battlefield. The garderobes are no better than they ever were, but their insolence feels ordinary instead of accusatory. You might call this clean. No one here would. They would call it ordinary, and ordinary has its own perfume mortar. Not quite dry bread, dog beeswax, tar, oak herb, a little vinegar, a little smoke. Death is back in its proper corners. Life retakes the middle of the room. At dusk, the steward walks the hall. He stops, sniffs and nods once, the nod of a man who can tell with his nose that dinner will be late, but happen that the lime will cure before the rain, that the ale will be decent by Michaelmas, if nobody meddles. He orders the herbs strewn thinner tomorrow. The rushes are too bold. He tells the baker to bake early and the laundress to dry in the loft if the wind turns. Command has a scent to inkwax and certainty. You go out to the wall walk. The air above the yard is a broth of small, honest things. A hawk passes and leaves nothing but shadow. Somewhere a child squeals because a cat has consented to be adored. The wind turns and carries the chapel's last resin thread past your face. You could almost call it pleasant. Almost. You learn the castle by its calendar as much as by its map. The walls stay where they are. The air moves with the seasons. Winter. By December, the keep has a single thought heat. The great hearth is a red animal that must be fed. Smoke thickens into a habit. It climbs the rafters and comes back down wearing wool. The hall smells of pine and peat, and dung burned for want of wood, of tallow candles sulking in their sockets, of wet cloaks steaming like low hills after rain. The rushes never quite dry. Mould creeps softly along the base of the panelling, a breath of cellar that has come upstairs for the winter. The solar closes its lids. Horn panes sweat. The bed curtains keep more than warmth breath turned stale by morning. Last night's onion, the faint sour whisper of a body wiped with vinegar instead of washed. Close stools are less often braved to the garderobe. The cupboard that hides them develops a quiet authority. Laundry day is steam and lie, and lant a workshop weather that coats the rafters with the smell of effort. Linen dries slowly. Mildew proposes itself at the hems. The laundress fights back with frost and sun when she can borrow an hour of either. Out in the yard, the midden shrinks under ash. The stable keeps its own summer, all ammonia and horse and hay. Opening the door is like entering a planet. Pigeons withdraw to the towers and leave a chalky scripture on the stair. Rats come in closer. Cats sleep nearer the kitchen. The moat goes black and still. Sometimes a sugar ice films it, and the crack when a stone tests it smells of iron and certainty. Holy days punctuate the fug. Candlemas brightens the chapel with beeswax and hope. Incense says winter will not last forever. In the kitchen, spices command an audience they rarely get. Cinnamon and clove and pepper pricked from the steward's chest, a borrowed orient that doesn't so much mask the smoke as crown it. Spring, then one morning, the air tastes green. It comes first in the laundry yard, where sheets lift like sails on the bleaching green, and the wind wrings life from them until what's left is sun. Lime wash is mixed again wet chalk, simple doctrine, and the passages brighten. A thatcher's ladder scratches slate. Reed bundles go up and bring with them marsh and river, the first truly clean smell since Michaelmas. Rushes are changed in the hall. The barrow carries out a winter's bad decisions. Fresh heaps of meadowsweet and mint make the floor walk like a garden for a week. Lambing adds its own chapter buyers that smell of milk and wool, and a brightness like new coin. The kitchen follows with milk-sweet curds and whey, the scalded tang of a cheese that will be better by harvest. Herbs come back alive rather than dried. Their green is different, less accusatory. The wardrobe opens chests to sunlight and pretends it is winning. The moat wakes sour and then settles. Frog and midge write their little signatures on the dusk. The gardener beats the chapels, rushes out on the grass. Bees explore the window ledges because bees will. In the infirmary, the coughs change key. Fewer smokes, more colds, less tallow, more wet feet. The castle smells like it is preparing to be clean, which is as near as it ever gets. Summer. By June, the keep is a kiln. The smell of it is heat itself, fast rot where anything wet dared to sit. Stale ale brightening towards vinegar in the jugs. Meat hanging a day too long and getting ideas. Flies stage a parliament in every window. Cheese goes from ripe to insolent. Fish must be judged by the minute. The herb garden saves everyone. Rosemary smokes in braziers. Meadowsweet is strewn over floors. Mint is bruised into water and drunk as medicine and theatre. The privies are their worst selves. Guards curse the garderobes and choose corners. Lime answers as best it can with its clean chalk rule voice. The kitchens are a storm roasting that smacks of feast boiling, that smells of penance baking, that forgives everything for an hour. Woodsmoke turns thinner in heat. Charcoal speaks in a dry, metallic line. Grease is impatient. The floor learns it. The hall breathes pottage and sweat and wet dog that tried the moat and regretted it too late. Fairs come, and with them perfumes the castle rarely sees rosewater on a stranger's sleeve. civet on a noble's pomander, resinous pitch from a new cart, leather fresh from the tannery, sour and proud. Barrels arrive and the yard smells of malt, not yet begun, a malt that will be autumn's work, but which already thinks out loud in the warm. The season also has its cruelties. Fevers arrive that sweeten the air around beds in a way no one will name. The chapel burns more incense and the crypt opens its door more often than a summer should ask. The moat is busiest now. Algae write a green skin on the water. Ducks turn that skin into lines and comment on it at volume. When rain breaks the heat, the first scent of stone is so clean it hurts. Then the moat gives back what the weeks have banked, and the yard remembers why freshness is a small god with a poor memory. Autumn harvest shifts the balance. The fields come home, a smell of straw and sweat, and straw again, generous and serious. The hall learns Lammas once more. The first fresh loaf after months of winter flour smells as if someone put sunlight in a kiln. Malting truly begins. Barley is steeped until it breathes wet stone and pond, then turned and dried. The malt house speaks bread and biscuit and a brown comfort that lingers in the clothes of men who tend it. The brewer's corner is its own weather-sweet mash, warm yeast, a hint of stable from the draft hope. Autumn is also slaughter. The yard becomes a professional. Blood has a clear, bright smell at first iron and hot salt, then a quick slide towards penny and penny again. Tubs of brine stand by. The air sharpens. Smokehouses take their due greenwood first, then oak, then a dense tarry perfection that will keep a ham through Lent. The dogs stand wrapped. Cats are less polite. Ashes change from hearth grey to smokehouse black. The chapel burns a little more beeswax because it is good to remember souls when your hands smell only of flesh. Cellars swallow summer. Barrels arrive with a yeasty sigh. The cool down there stops being damp and begins to be promise. The must of new ale, the salt medicine of fish in brine. Apples breathing a thin, clean perfume that will be vinegar by Candlemas autumn's tidy, edible gloom. The wardrobe closes chests. Moth powder pricks the throat. Furs wake sly and country. Tallow is poured against the short days and leaves the great hall smelling vaguely of mutton even when there is none. And then slowly the year settles back into smoke. The feasts tick past like lit tapers. All Saints has its beeswax and bone. Martinmas gives its goose and grease. Advent brings hunger by design and a room that smells of fasting and flint until someone cheats with spices, and Christmastide forgives them. The castle's nose is its almanac. You can stand in the doorway of the hall and tell the month without a window. Winter again. The mortar smell from summer repairs turns to nothing. New oak becomes furniture instead of news. Limewash loses its church white and accepts fingerprints. The garderobes continue their eternal sermon. The kitchen forgets lamb and remembers cabbage. The chapel's incense returns to its old job of consolation, and yet for all the steadiness, the nose never gets bored. Each season has its own kindness and its own malice. Spring lies pleasantly. Summer tells the truth loudly. Autumn is industrious. Winter is honest to the point of cruelty. The castle loops through them, keeping what it can, admitting what it must. You go up to the wall walk at dusk. The year smells of malt faint under smoke of wet leaves near the ditch of a hawk that passed an hour ago and left the sky cleaner by a feather. Down in the yard, a child bites a heel of bread still warm, and a dog breathes it in like a prayer. Somewhere a woman shakes linen, and it remembers the river. The bell rope smells of tar and piety. The moat breathes because it always does. The year turns. The air turns with it. The castle keeps the record. Stand still. Close your eyes. Breathe. If you followed the corridors, climbed the stairs, ducked into chambers and out onto walls, you already know this. The castle's smell is not one thing. It is a ledger, a palimpsest, a choir of small truths sung at once. And stone keeps the tune. Stone is no blank surface. It is chalk and shell and silt pressed into patience. Lime plaster drinks and exhales. Mortar veins carry damp and salts. The very blocks draw in smoke oils, urine vinegar, tallow breath. Every wall here is a lung that learned the habit of keeping. You can scrub a table, you can beat a tapestry. Stone merely remembers more quietly. What does it remember? It remembers the rushes new and river sweet on the first morning, then dark and matted and busy, a year of spilled ale and spittle and stew and dog. It remembers the smoke that varnished rafters black and taught banners to hang heavy, the thin, bitter thread of peat, the barnyard honesty of dung, the seaside ghost of seaweed on a lean year's fire. It remembers the yard horse and tanner and midden and the pen that learned pig as a second language. It remembers the garderobes where cold air and warm truth met over a shaft, and the faint, permanent ammonia that never left the stones after the first winter. It remembers the moat lazy green convinced of its own purpose, and the times it was asked to be a sewer, a pantry, a weapon. It remembers the kitchens generous and grudging by turns. Beef fat, bitten by flame onions, arguing with steam pots that carried yesterday forward. It remembers the cellars, cool and patient. Brine's medicinal bite ales, yeasty optimism, cheese that crossed the line from character to insult and was forgiven in spring. It remembers the infirmary which smelt of effort and edges vinegar, and tack-stitch blood, and boiled herbs, and the sweet thinness that meant the prayers would be longer than the night. It remembers the great hall, the arithmetic of community done on rush and plank, where tallow and cabbage and wet dog and pomander learned to coexist, and where morning smelled of ash and flint, and the decision to try again. It remembers the solar and bedchamber bedstraw, ripened by bodies and time curtains that kept warmth, and secrets linen that told the truth between laundering's close stools that tried to be discreet, Jordan pots that tried less. It remembers the wardrobe's chests breathing wool and moth and lavender, the laundries steamly and lant and soap and sun, and the sore-handed mercy of clean by inches. It remembers the chapel where beeswax and resin claimed a little territory each day and lost it each day with excellent grace. It remembers the crypt and charnel where lime spoke plainly and bone answered with chalk, and where the air learned to tell the difference between rot and memory. It remembers pests' rat runs, polished into skirting flea powders that bit the nose, bedbugs' wrong little spice, and it remembers the tedious valor of cats and terriers and brimstone. It remembers siege, pitch hot, sand glue, fear. It remembers relief bread that steamed a room into tears resin that sang thanksgiving. It remembers ruin, the wrong color of smoke. Fruit, sugar ruined by boot. Quicklimes, chalky, amen. It remembers repair, new oaks, winey sap, lime wash, preaching white reeds, lifted like clean sentences onto a roof. It remembers the year winters, wet wool and mold, springs lime and lamb, summers, rot and roses, autumns, malt and blood. And it says with stones good manners. All of this happened here. Why then do people say castles smelt like death? Because life at full concentration can be misread. Because the castle is a condenser. Hundreds of bodies within walls that do not breathe quickly. Fires that never go out. Animals quartered indoors. Water that loiters food, that is both raw and cooked within a single system. Waste that exits slowly, and sometimes not at all. Add time. The nose, which notices change more than constants, registers the constant and calls it finality. Death is here, of course, on pallets and biers, under flags, behind low doors. But most of what you smell is prevention and consequence smoke that dried timbers and scared mold. Brine that outlasted summer. Tallow that extended light into a day that had finished talking. Vinegar that argued with rot. Lime that made breaches honest and graves safe. Even the bad notes moat garderobe mid-air evidence of a society that insisted on continuing. The stink of the garderobe is the scent of not doing your business in the hall. The reek of the midden is where kitchen and yard agree to keep their quarrels in one place. The strong breath of the smokehouse is a promise meat will be food in February. The nose is a moralist. It wants clean to mean good. Medieval stone has no such metaphysics. It keeps accounts. And when accounts are printed in smoke and grease and salt and breath, they read darker than a modern palate expects. There is another answer. Less kind castles also smelt like death, because status concentrates consequence. The poor lived with animals, so did lords. The poor used rushes. The hall used more. The poor fetched water from a ditch. The moat was a ditch with a pedigree. Wealth added layers pomanders, beeswax, imported spice tapestries that were beautiful and excellent at keeping old smoke. And layers do not cancel. They add. The upper board ate the better cut but sweated in the same air. Perfume on a hot day in the great hall does not solve the cabbage, it duets with it. Stone knows this. The porous blocks in the gate passage remember both the day of coronation wreaths and the afternoon someone was dragged through by the heels. The keep stair remembers the talk you do not put in letters and the resin you lit because you could not bear not to. The chapel step remembers every foot and every grief. The crypt remembers the names you forgot. Stone is clean in the sense that it does not lie. Walk once more. Run a hand along the wall in the hall where the rushes were changed last week. It feels cool. It smells faintly of lime and old soot and the ghost of rosemary. Press your palm to the pier beside the kitchen door. Grease from centuries has gone to deep amber. Even scrubbed it offers a little kitchen back to your skin. Lean over the moat parapet. The wet face of the outer wall breathes up a dim green algae stone time. Step into the chapel and breathe beeswax that is stronger now because you've just come from the yard. Open the crypt door a finger's width and you will learn again that chalk has a voice. Then go outside the gate and turn round. From here the castle looks cleaner. Geometry, strength banners convincing the eye that air inside must be brave air. But even at this distance on a still day, you can catch a drift. Woodsmoke braided with malt, stable laid thin over kitchen, a trace of river, a thought of lime. That is the castle's public breath, the private one you have already worn. You will carry some of it home with you. In your hair, a thread of resin. In your clothes, hearth and onion. On your hands, a memory of oak and wax. In your head, the knowledge that smell of death was lazy shorthand for stone, doing its job in a world that never stopped producing. You may wash. It will fade. It won't go. Stone remembers. That is why it was asked to hold up history. It holds the weight and it holds the air. So if anyone tells you castles smelled like death, you can nod. And then you can tell them what death smelled like here. Like life multiplied and slowed, salted and smoked, limed and laundered, prayed over and pushed along. Like breath that could not leave quickly. Like meals that became people and then became memory, like seasons repeating their honest work, inside walls that listened, breathe once more. There it is, smoke herb damp, dog, beeswax, iron chalk, a chord, not a single note, the scent of something that outlived everyone who made it. What stone remembers we call the past. What we breathe of it we call a story.